Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hello everyone, let me introduce myself. My name is Alia Nadira Mukni. My student number is 089. In this video, I will explain about phonological attenuation, process, and rules. In language, the way we pronounce a sound can change depending on its environment. This variation is called an alternation. For example, pin with aspiration and spin without aspiration. Even though both words use the same basic sound p, the actual pronunciation is different. The difference is called an alternation. Now, an important question is, where does this difference come from? To understand that, we need to know two levels of representation. First is underlying form. This is the basic form stored in our mind. For example, the word pin and spin start with the same underlying sound p. And surface form, this is an actual pronunciation we produce when we speak like p and p. So, we can say alternation happens when one underlying form is pronounced in different ways. Next, we talk about a process. A phonological process is what causes the sound to change. For example, the p in pin becomes p because of a process called aspiration. This happens when p is at the beginning of a stressed syllable. So, alternation is the result and process is the cause. Now, how do linguists explain this clearly? They use rules. A rule describes what sound changes, how it changes, and in what environment. The general form of a rule is A become B when occurs between X and Y. For example, we can describe aspiration like this. P become P at the beginning of a stressed syllable. These rules explain why pin has P, but spin does not. Another important point is phonological rules are systematic, not random. Speakers apply them naturally even without realizing it. Also, rules can be obligatory, which means the change must happen. Example, input. And optional, the change may happen or not. Example, in fast and careful speech. Now, let's move on to the types of alternation. The first type of alternation is phonetically conditioned and alternation. This type of alternation happens only because of the surrounding sounds. For example, man with nasalized vowel and map no nasalization. Another example is input. Here, changes into because of the following p. These changes are automatic and obligatory. The second is phonetically and morphologically conditioned alternation. In this type, sounds changes are influenced by the phonetic environment and the structure of the word. For example, English plurals. Cats become cats, dog become dogs, and bus become buses. This difference depends on the final sound of the word and plural suffix. The third is phonetically, morphologically, and lexically conditioned alternation. In this type is more complex because it depends on phonetic factor, morphological structure, and the specific words. For example, electric and electricity. Another example, sign and signature. Not all words follow the same pattern, so some form need to be memorized. Alright, the last type is suppletion or non-phonological alternation. The last type is completely different. This change cannot be explained by phonological rules. For example, go become when, good become better, and mouse become mice. This is no clear sounds parents here, so these forms must be memorized. Alright, I think that's all from me. The next material will be explained by Chelsea.
Hello everyone, my name is Renata Chelsea with student number 091, and in this video I will explain formal rules and rule writing in phonology. Formal rules are important because they help us describe sound patterns clearly and systematically. They also allow linguistics to generalize patterns across different sounds. In addition, formal rules help us understand how and why sounds change in specific environments, not just what the changes are. Now let's begin with formal rules. The general form of a phonological rule is A becomes B between X and Y. This means that A becomes B when it occurs between X and Y. Here, A is the original sound, B is the resulting sound, X and Y represent the environment where the change occurs. So, phonological rules describe both the change and the condition where the change happens. Now, let's look at an example. The rule is becomes a flap between a vowel and an unstressed syllabic segment. The symbol is called a flap, which sounds like a very quick or t. For example, butter, leather. This process is called flapping, and it is very common in American English. Another important point is that rules can be written using segments or features. Segments are full sounds such as t or p, while features describe phonetic properties such as plus voice or minus voice. Using features is useful because it allows linguistics to describe patterns that apply to groups of sounds, not just individual segments. Sometimes rules are written separately for different sounds. For example, p becomes p glottal stop at the end of a word. T becomes t glottal stop at the end of a word. K becomes k glottal stop at the end of a word. Here, the symbol represents a word boundary or the end of a word. These rules show that voiceless stops may be glottalized at the end of a word. Now, let's move on to parenthesis notation. Parenthesis notation shows that part of the environment is optional. The general form is A becomes B after X, optionally followed by Y and before Z. This means that Y may or may not appear in the environment. For example, this rule means that O becomes the O before an optional consonant at the end of a word. Now let's move on to braces. Braces are written using curly brackets, and they indicate alternative environments. The correct format is A becomes B before either X or Y. For example, this means that T becomes a glottal stop before a consonant or before the end of a word. So braces represent an either or relationship between environments. Now let's move on to superscripts and subscripts. Superscripts and subscripts are used to indicate the number of segments in a rule environment. For example, this means that E becomes I when it is followed by a minimum of two consonants. Here, the subscript 2 indicates the minimum number of consonants required. Another example, this means that E becomes I when it is followed by at most one consonant. In this case, the superscript 1 indicates the maximum number of consonants allowed. So, superscripts and subscripts allow phonologists to specify numerical condition in phonological environments. Finally, let's move to alpha notation. Alpha notation is used to show that two sounds share the same feature values. This is especially useful in processes like nasal assimilation, where a nasal sound change to match the following consonant. The rule can be written as the nasal N takes the same values for anterior and coronal as the consonant that follows it. For example, input is pronounced as input. Include is pronounced as include. In these examples, the nasal sound changed its place of articulation to match the following consonant. This process is known as nasal assimilation. Alright, I think that's all from me. The next material will be explained by Nabila.
Hello everyone, my name is Nabila Lydia Putri with student number 090. Today I will explain how sounds can change in real speech. So in this video, we will not only look at theory, but also practice how sounds are actually pronounced. So please listen carefully and try to repeat with me, okay? Let's start! First, we talk about assimilation. Assimilation happens when one sound becomes similar to another sound near it. This usually happens to make pronunciation easier and faster. Let's look at this example. Handbag. Say it slowly. Handbag. Now say it faster. Handbag. And again, handbag. Did you hear that? The changed into This happens because the sound p is produced using the lips. So the changed to match the position of the mouth. So assimilation helps us speak more smoothly. Let's try again. Handbag, handbag, handbag. Great. Next is deletion. Deletion happens when a sound is not pronounced, especially in fast or casual speech. Example, list. Say it slowly, list. Now say it faster, list, list. The t is not pronounced. Another example, hand, 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 hand. The t disappears. This happens because pronouncing all consonants can be difficult, so some sounds are dropped to make speech easier. Try again. List, list. Hand, hand. Good. Now let's look at insertion. Insertion happens when we add a sound into a word. This usually happens when a word is difficult to pronounce. Example, film. Say film. Now some people say film, film. They add small vowel sound in the middle. This makes the word easier to pronounce because film has a difficult consonant cluster. So insertion helps make pronunciation clearer. Next is metathesis. Metathesis happens when two sounds change position. For example, bird. In the past, the order of sounds was different. So instead of adding or deleting sounds, the sounds simply switch places. This shows that sound change can also affect the order of sounds. Last is reduplication. Reduplication means repeating part of word. For example, bye-bye, Goody goody! Here, part of the word is copied and repeated. In English, reduplication is not very common, but in other languages, it is used more often to show meaning like plural or emphasis. Alright, so to sum up in this video, we learned that in phonology, one sound can be pronounced in different ways depending on its environment. And this is called alternation. Happen because of phonological process, and we use rules to explain how and when the sounds change. Some alternations are influenced only by surrounding sounds, while others are also affected by word structure or even specific words. So not all change follow the same pattern. We also learned that formal rules helps us describe this sound change clearly using patterns like A become B in a certain environment. So we can understand not just what changed, but why it happens. Finally, in real speech, we can see this change directly where sounds can become similar like in assimilation, disappear like in deletion, be added like insertion, change position which is called metasis, or be repeated which is called reduplication. So overall, phonology helps us understand that pronunciation is about sound, not just spelling. Thank you for watching.